Rajesh and Sunita Prasad were once the picture of the American dream. Hardworking immigrants raising two bright children, Anaya and Rohan, in a quiet California suburb. But within just a few short years, their story would twist into one of America's most shocking crimes, ending not with success, but with betrayal, blood, and the first death sentence ever given to an Indian citizen in the United States. In 1998, the Prasad family arrived in the United States carrying dreams of prosperity and stability. They came from Lucknow, a bustling city in northern India, where Rajesh Prasad had grown up in a modest household. In America, he believed, every ounce of hard work would be rewarded, and every sacrifice would pave the way for a better future. With his wife, Sunita, and their two young children, Anaya and Rohan, he settled in California, choosing a suburban neighborhood that appeared safe, modern, and filled with opportunities. For the first few years, life followed the pattern of countless immigrant success stories. Rajesh opened a small grocery store, and with persistence and clever planning, soon expanded into a chain. His reputation as a disciplined, hardworking businessman quickly grew. Sunita balanced her days between supporting the business and nurturing their children, ensuring they adapted to a new culture while holding on to their Indian values. To outsiders, the Prasad family represented everything admirable about the immigrant journey. They hosted community events, donated to local temples, and spoke warmly of how far they had come. Neighbors admired their unity, often pointing to them as a shining example of discipline and determination. The children thrived academically, winning awards and bringing pride to their parents. Every photograph, every public appearance seemed to capture perfection. Yet, behind this flawless image, shadows slowly gathered. Rajesh's relentless drive created silent friction within the family. His obsession with control meant every decision, big or small, passed through him. Sunita, graceful and patient, bore the weight of compromise, though friends later admitted she occasionally hinted at struggles in hushed tones. Beneath the surface of prosperity, cracks had begun to form, small at first, but destined to widen with devastating force. The dream the Prasads had built was beautiful, but it rested on fragile ground. As the years passed, the glow of success that once surrounded the Prasad family began to dim. The grocery stores, once a source of pride, demanded endless hours and constant reinvestment. Rajesh, who had built his life around discipline and control, grew increasingly frustrated when profits dipped or when debts piled higher than expected. He was said to have borrowed large sums to keep the businesses afloat, and whispers circulated about money lost to gambling tables in distant casinos. Though he never spoke openly about it, rumors followed him like a shadow. Sunita tried to shield her children from the growing tension. She encouraged them to focus on school and extracurricular activities, but behind closed doors, the atmosphere inside the home shifted. Arguments became more frequent, often erupting late at night when the children pretended to sleep. What began as raised voices would sometimes escalate into explosive anger, and though no physical harm was reported, the emotional strain was undeniable. The children, Anaya and Rohan, bore the weight of expectations that few teenagers could carry. Rajesh demanded excellence in every field, from academics to behavior, and his disappointment was harsh whenever they fell short. Friends noticed their nervousness during family gatherings and their reluctance to invite classmates home. Despite their polite smiles, cracks in their cheerful facade grew harder to ignore. By 2001, the family's troubles could no longer be hidden from the outside world. Rivals in the business community whispered that Rajesh had crossed dangerous lines, borrowing money from people who were not patient creditors. Others suspected jealousy and competition played a role, as his success made him both admired and despised. Whatever the truth, the Prasad household had become a place of quiet fear, its walls closing in, its secrets multiplying, and its silence growing heavier with every passing day. On the night of September 17, 2001, the Prasad home sat in uneasy silence, its lights glowing faintly against the dark California sky. Neighbors later recalled hearing noises that sounded like shouting and heavy thuds, but no one thought to intervene. By morning, the house was still and lifeless, its windows drawn as if hiding something unspeakable inside. When calls to the family went unanswered, police were dispatched to perform a welfare check. What they found inside would etch the Prasad name into history for the darkest of reasons. The moment officers stepped through the front door, they sensed something was terribly wrong. The house was unnervingly orderly, with no signs of forced entry or theft. Yet each room told a story of violence. Rajesh was discovered in the living room, his body bearing deep wounds that spoke of ferocity and rage. Sunita lay in the master bedroom, motionless, her final moments marked by struggle. In separate rooms upstairs, the children were found. Anaya on her bed, Rohan near his desk, both victims of the same merciless hand. The crime scene was both horrifying and baffling. Expensive jewelry remained untouched, wallets were undisturbed, and the locks on the doors and windows were intact. This was not the work of a random intruder or a desperate burglar. The brutality suggested something personal, someone who harbored hatred deep enough to annihilate an entire family. Detectives combed through every detail, documenting the eerie stillness of the home, the absence of signs of robbery, and the cold precision of the killings. News spread rapidly, gripping both American and Indian communities. The massacre of an immigrant family chasing the American dream was almost unimaginable. For the investigators, one chilling question loomed larger than all others. Who had turned the Prasad home into a house of blood and silence? The investigation into the Prasad murders initially spread wide, casting suspicion on business competitors, disgruntled employees, and even loan sharks rumored to be circling Rajesh. Yet as detectives sifted through evidence, the picture that emerged pointed closer to home. Fingerprints lifted from the kitchen knife used in the killings matched someone the family knew well, Rajesh's younger brother, Vikram Prasad. Vikram had moved to the United States only 2 years before the tragedy, seeking opportunity under his brother's guidance. But instead of building a new life, he struggled to find steady work. Friends and acquaintances described him as restless, often bitter about his circumstances. He depended heavily on Rajesh for money, and resentment brewed when his brother refused to give him a role in the family business. To Vikram, Rajesh was not a mentor but a gatekeeper, holding the keys to success yet unwilling to share. Detectives discovered receipts for knives purchased by Vikram just days before the massacre. More disturbing still were handwritten notes found in his apartment, filled with angry scribbles about betrayal, greed, and taking back what was mine. The evidence painted the picture of a man consumed by jealousy and rage, watching from the sidelines as his brother thrived while he floundered. What unsettled investigators most was Vikram's calm behavior after the murders. He showed no visible grief at the funerals, speaking little and keeping to himself. His detachment raised suspicions further, and when the forensic evidence was presented, the case against him grew overwhelming. The possibility that the Prasad's deaths were not the result of outsiders, but of betrayal within the family sent shockwaves through the community. The man they had once welcomed into their homes as a brother and uncle now stood accused of orchestrating the massacre that wiped out his own bloodline. The trial of Vikram Prasad began in 2003, and from the very first day, it captured national attention. Courtrooms filled to capacity, with journalists crowding outside and headlines splashed across newspapers in both America and India. The story of an immigrant who had allegedly slaughtered his own family in cold blood was almost too shocking to believe, and yet the evidence told a story more chilling than rumor ever could. Prosecutors built their case methodically. They argued that Vikram's motive stemmed from jealousy and resentment, a toxic blend that grew as his brother's business flourished while he remained unemployed and adrift. They showed jurors the knife receipts, the incriminating notes scrawled in his handwriting, and most damning of all, the bloodstains on his clothing that matched his brother and niece. Each piece of evidence chipped away at any possibility of innocence. The defense tried to counter with claims of mental illness, presenting Vikram as a man crushed by failure and untreated psychological trauma. They painted a portrait of someone unable to control his impulses, urging jurors to see him as a tragic figure rather than a monster. But the jury was unmoved. They saw not a man broken by hardship, but someone who had planned, executed, and concealed an unthinkable crime. Perhaps the most haunting moment of the trial was Vikram's demeanor. He sat stone-faced, rarely reacting to testimony or evidence. When the guilty verdict was read, he showed no emotion, as though the fate of his entire life carried no weight. For many in the courtroom, that cold indifference was more disturbing than the crime itself. In a historic ruling, the judge sentenced him to death, making Vikram Prasad the first Indian citizen in U.S. history to face execution. The courtroom gasped, but justice, in the eyes of the jury, had been served. In the years following the sentencing, the Prasad family home stood as a silent shell, its once lively walls now cloaked in decay and whispers. Neighbors avoided walking too close, claiming the air around the property felt heavy, as though the memory of violence still lingered. Some spoke of flickering lights at odd hours, others of strange sounds at night, though no one dared to step inside. The massacre had left not just a family destroyed, but a community scarred, haunted by the knowledge that evil had not come from outside, but from within the family itself. True crime enthusiasts, journalists, and even academics continued to revisit the case. It was dissected in documentaries, debated in legal circles, and remembered in immigrant communities as both a cautionary tale and a tragedy. For many, the horror lay not only in the brutality of the crime, but in the betrayal at its core. A brother who turned his envy into an act of annihilation. The case challenged the comforting belief that family represents safety, reminding the world that sometimes the greatest danger comes from those closest to us. Vikram Prasad spent his years on death row without offering confession or apology. Appeals were filed but dismissed, and each hearing ended with the same conclusion: his guilt was undeniable. He remained a figure of silence, a man whose motives could never be fully explained, whose face revealed nothing of regret or remorse. The Prasad massacre became more than a story of one family's destruction. It became a symbol of how ambition, jealousy, and greed can corrode the bonds of kinship until nothing remains but ashes. For those who once admired the Prasads as a model immigrant family, their legacy transformed into something chilling, a reminder that behind even the brightest dreams, shadows may be waiting to consume everything.